Welcome back for another episode of Trucker Talk Radio Behind the Wheelhouse. I'm Justin, your host, and I appreciate you joining me for another episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Rodeo for supporting today's episode. As trucking continues to evolve, finding qualified drivers, improving hiring, and building trust throughout the transportation industry has never been more important. Rodeo is helping modernize that process through Driver Verify and their Ready digital passport. For truck drivers, definitely check out the digital passport. You're able to put all your information, CDL, medical card, pictures of your truck, all your insurance, all in one place, and you can share all that with a click of a button to DOT officers, to an insurance company, to a onboarder, carrier and such. So again, check them out. We appreciate their support at ready-app.com. Today's guest is the most influential trucking organization in America. Eric Sauer is the Chief Executive Officer of the California Trucking Association, the largest state trucking association in the nation. Founded in 1934, the California Trucking Association has spent more than 90 years representing trucking companies. Eric himself has spent more than 2 decades working on behalf of the trucking industry at both the state and national levels, helping carriers navigate everything from environmental regulations, infrastructure investment, to workforce development and transportation policy. Eric, welcome to the Behind the Wheelhouse.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. We know California is always at the forefront of trucking stuff, so I appreciate you taking a little time. But before we get into California and what you're doing at the Trucking Association, let's go kind of back to the beginning and what got you involved in the trucking industry.
Yeah, my itch for the trucking industry actually started when I want to say like 8 years old. My
Really?
mom's friend was dating an executive of Viking Freight Systems,
Mm-hmm.
which got purchased by FedEx many years ago. We got invited to this truck rodeo, their truck rodeo. And I've always just, been fascinated with trucks. And so I was able to be around trucks. They actually put me in a truck. I drove around in the yard with a couple of the drivers, saw the competition, but I was a big fan of the outlaw bandit trucker movies, Convoy, Smokey and the Bandit. Like,
Oh yeah.
those movies were just great. And, I've always kind of had kind of a thing for trucking. I've always wondered, like, wow, these are big trucks, they're moving freight. Where's the freight going to? It's wow, there's just so many of these trucks out there and whatnot. And so I always had that itch. But then I was working with a colleague of mine in a previous career, and her sister got promoted to senior vice president at the California Trucking Association. And my college background, I minored in political science. And so I've always had kind of a thing on how the process works. And there was
Mm-hmm.
an opening at CTA and interviewed for the job. And I guess you could say the rest is history. I've been here since August 1st will actually be my 25th year with the organization. So almost half my year. I could tell you how old I am. You can do the math. I was born in 1971. Almost half my career
Yep.
has been, or half my life has been spent here. But I truly enjoy representing such just a fantastic industry and our membership. I love hearing these stories of how these trucking company gets started. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
the person taking the risk with one truck and they risk everything. And the next thing you know, they've grown their fleet, grown their the number of employees, putting their footprint or stamp on the industry and being able to move America's economy. And they're just such hard workers. And let's be honest, I mean, it's a tough
It
industry.
is.
And
It
it's,
is.
you can magnify that by 10 being in California.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of how I got my start. My background is through policy and regulatory, transportation and safety. Also, working with our lobbyists on, providing information to lawmakers and whatnot. So that's kind of my background. I was senior vice president for a number of years for our government affairs. And then when the opportunity arose for, the opening of the CEO, it was pretty much a smooth transition just based on my experience and knowledge of the association and kind of looking at things as like, wow, maybe we could do things a little different. Maybe we could do things a
Mm-hmm.
lot better. And so the last few years, have been pretty successful, not only from an advocacy standpoint for us, but also a financial health standpoint for the organization. But I truly enjoy being or representing such just a meat potatoes type of industry that does so much for so many people and is often overlooked.
Yeah, it is, and I think I won't speak for California because you know it better than I do, but I would
Ah,
say
come on, you can
probably
say what you want.
I can probably say it's
I've
no
heard
different.
worse.
Well, I know it's no different than what it is here in the South where I'm from. No one appreciates the trucking industry. They don't realize how important it is to the American economy, the national security. And truck drivers in general, like you said, don't have it great. I mean, they get no respect on the road. They get no love for parking. It's just a struggle. And then it's not like they're getting rich and retiring in 5 years either. I mean, most of them have to do it for 40 years just to hopefully have enough money put back to make it. And most of them still can't. So what has changed the most, do you think, over the year 25 years there?
Wow. Um, well, the issues first and
Mm,
foremost. I mean, when I first started, um, the issues were delays with obtaining their registration in a timely manner from the Department of Motor Vehicles, delays in a transportation permit to be able to move an extra legal load, which still occurs.
mhm.
Um, and issues with the CHP, getting a violation and thinking the CHP was just targeting them and stuff like that. And I'm not dismissing that those aren't issues. Any issue that prevents a trucking company to not let the wheels move on their trucks, that's a problem. I totally understand that. But you transition from those issues to the environmental issues, labor related issues, and these, the environmental regulations are just so costly. If you're not in compliance, you've got issues there. So it's just the issues have just been magnified. And you sprinkle in also loss of truck parking spaces. I mean, that is an often overlooked issue. These drivers need a place to park, and California has historically been number one or number two in least amount of truck parking for the industry. What we've seen over the years is a lot of these industrial areas that have allowed trucks to park makes sense. They're not in a residential neighborhood. They're not, navigating through pedestrians and cyclists and whatnot. But you're seeing a lot of these local jurisdictions coming up with ordinances that are preventing trucks from parking in those areas. So it kind of shrinks the pool of available spots. And for us, it's kind of a reactionary type of issue because we're a statewide organization. There's 58 counties, 433 or 434 cities within the state. It's hard for us to track those things. So
Right.
usually it's after the fact, or if a member is involved or engaged and aware, they will let us know, and then we, advocate on behalf. But to answer your question, I mean, man, it's just the issues are just so much different now, and the movement towards zero emission vehicles, which I get it, there is, we can do better as an industry, but don't,
Mhm.
I don't, it's not like we haven't done anything. We have the most
Right.
strictest and stringent truck,
Mhm.
on-road truck and bus regulation. It was the first of its kind in the nation. Our members in the industry spent billions of dollars to comply with that regulation. It's made
Mhm.
tremendous reductions. We've made tremendous strides. Can we do more? Yes, but let's start thinking about doing more in a more reasonable fashion that's realistic and that is a sensible type of solution.
Hey drivers, our partners over at Zero Breeze have designed a no idle air conditioner for sleeper cabs and fleets that can pay for itself in just one summer. If you're spending up to $40 a night in fuel, it's time to stop idling and start saving. For $50 off, email sales@zerobreeze.com or text them at 945 247 1298. And don't forget to ask them about their extended warranty option. Check them out today at zerobreeze.com. Yeah, now and you bring up something, and we'll get into the emissions and stuff in a minute because y'all are the forefront of that in the state by far. But I've had several of your colleagues on. I've had the Texas Association president. I've had North Carolina president on, and they all say the same thing about parking. I've had the pleasure of having a truck parking club on the show. They've got some good ideas they're trying to do. I've talked to a couple other the trucking places, through the different shows, and they all have good ideals, but it's still, there's got to be places for those ideals to work, and I didn't notice it that much in your state when I traveled because I wasn't really on the interstate that much. I was on, I think, Highway 100 or Highway 1, whatever runs up through there is what me and my daughter traveled. But the problem that I see, like in our areas, is there's not enough parking on interstate. And that's where most of your trucks are. And like even with these trucking park clubs, a lot of their parking is, off the beating path. Well, there's not 100 trucks in that area that can, take use of that. But everybody seems to now understand that that's an issue because, drivers do need a restroom. They need a safe place to
Safety.
park and know that
Yeah.
they can, they're going to sleep with their door locked or whatever, but they don't have to tie the seat belt through the seat and through the door just to make sure that they make it through the night safely. And then
Yeah.
parking on the side of the road is dangerous for them and the person driving the
Correct.
automobile. So that's not the thing. So that is a nationwide issue for sure. But let's jump into the CTA part of it. So for listeners who might not be familiar with what y'all do there, or even just a trucking organization statewide, anywhere, kind of let them know what the organization does and the mission.
So, essentially, I say this all the time. I think most of the reason why people join trade associations is, especially in California, there's always benefits. You get discounts on stuff. Those are great. But for California, it's tried and true. This is all about advocacy. And it's, as one of my mentors that's a member, longtime member, has told me, your role is to keep government off our ass. And so in California, advocacy is number one for trade associations. So, I always say this when I talk to our members or I talk to people or on podcasts or, doing an interview, like we've had 7 straight years at the Capitol, very successful years. And people probably look at me like I'm from Mars, but that's through telling the story, getting our members engaged, talking to lawmakers, expressing, the issues or the impact of these proposals, or what I like to call brilliant ideas, are going to have on our industry, talking about how the impact of the employees of these member companies and how their constituents are going to be affected. So, we've had a very good run on that. But for the association and what we do, it's advocacy, it's training, it's education. Um, that's pretty much the bones of a trade association. But like I said before, it's more often than not, if you're a member of a trade association, especially in California, you want protection from government. You want to be able to have your business be able to continue to operate, navigate through these regulations, come up with solutions. So, we're a full service organization, been around 92 years. Yeah, it's a fantastic organization. Representing like a true, a real business industry. It's like I said before, like this industry is just, they do so much.
How important is it for the trucking companies to have that strong voice in government? Because especially for the little guys, they can't make any headway no matter what they scream out. They're just not going to get the respect or the ear to listen to. So how important is it for the trucking companies and organizations to work with y'all so then as a collaborative group can go to the government and speak on their behalf?
Oh, it's paramount to any sort of success. There's 70,000 motor carriers that have, operating authority in the state. I'd love to have them all as members. That's just not realistic. But it's hard getting out there in the public, especially when you're representing the trucking industry. The general public looks at, let's be honest, I mean, look at the truck as like a overweight, damaging
Yeah.
pavement, polluting the air, unsafe, and all that. And, I like to counter that. And I always like to use opportunities like this to kind of talk about what the industry provides. And so when people talk about they're beating up our roads, I'm quick to point out that, well, we also pay billions of dollars to go towards infrastructure. And in California, sometimes maybe those funds don't go to what those intended purposes are. So,
Mhm.
we do pay our fair share. Safety, we're the only state in the nation that has two inspection programs. So we have the FMCSA, and then we also have the CHP's BIT program, Basic Inspection of Terminals program. So we got two. So safety, that's we have to be in compliance with those regulations and requirements. And then also the pollution with these, the emissions and whatnot. We're subject to so many programs. The biggest one is being in compliance with the on-road truck and bus rule and the smog testing requirements and all that. So, those trucks are subject to those regulations. So it's not like, we're these polluting, unsafe, beating up the roads type of industry. We invest a lot of money in all of those areas. So, to talk about like, you want to paint this picture, and it's an accurate picture of what exactly this industry provides to the state, and it's jobs, it's moving your freight, and a good example of that is during COVID. Like if you didn't have the trucks moving, where would I mean? How it was already bad, but it would have been a lot worse.
A
And
lot worse.
this is the first time in a long time where the industry got major kudos and credit for what they did. And I'm just a little disappointed since then. Like, you don't really see that as much,
Everybody
So
forgets real quick.
exactly.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, as far as like getting people involved, I would love to have everybody join, but that's just not going to happen. But we do our best to, broadcast on social media and other platforms to show what we do and hopefully pick up some interest in joining and supporting the organization and what we do because, we fight for the industry. That's number one, you know,
Well,
first issue for us.
well, and I think too, you probably as well, but y'all have to take probably a little bit more responsibility than a Rhode Island or a Delaware or even Montana, even it's a large state, because a lot of the stuff that y'all do trickles down to the other states. Texas is another one that, y'all are big, big, infrastructure states that, your policies and the things that you try to do, go to help the whole industry. But I'd like to ask you, what is the difference between y'all's CHP inspections and stuff versus the national one? Do y'all do a few things different?
Yeah, it's called a basic inspection of terminals. So they come in and look at driver's records, making sure that, the trucks have been, the inspection reports on the trucks. And I want to say it was maybe in the 80s they created the BIT program. So it mirrors feds, but then it's also, it's California specific. And so, we have a great working relationship with the Highway Patrol. We partner with them on a ton of safety related
Hmm.
campaigns. We also every other year we partner with them on what we call a commercial vehicle safety summit. It's open to any trucking company that operates in California. You don't have to be a CTA member. And the best part is it's free. You get a free lunch. You get to interact with the Highway Patrol. We always have FMCSA come and put on some classes. There's other state agencies there, Caltrans, DMV. And it's a day-long safety event. They have breakout sessions. And so that's something that I've been very fortunate enough to work hand in hand with the Highway Patrol on for, I want to say like 18 years. We do it every other year. It's usually in the Southland. So I'll be sure to, give you the information when the next one comes up.
Yeah, definitely. I'd appreciate that. And I think that's a good thing that y'all do there on the state side, because I had a gentleman out of Arizona who was a CDL school trainer, and he was going through different numbers, and he made it really simple. There's just not enough federal employees to do the inspections in-house and check records, and it's just based off that, it's tough to the government to do it all. So if you take it on as a state, now of course I know you got to have funding and all that to be able to pay those employees, but that is a big thing. I wish that would happen in more states, because there's a lot of carriers out there that's never had any type of anybody walk in
Yeah.
their buildings. So no, I think that's a good thing. But one thing I did want to talk with you about, and get your opinion, and maybe you can, answer some of this for the other states. Y'all, and you've kind of spoke on it, but y'all are light years ahead of any other state when it comes to emissions, truck age limits, all that. And you've brought it up. It is. I mean, these older trucks, they they blow the black smoke, and they they do pollute. We've always kind of just taken it. I've actually lived in China. I've seen real pollution, where I can't see the building next to me when I wake up in the mornings. But how hard has that been? I know it's something that needs to be done, but I mean, let's face it, California gets yelled and screamed at probably every minute from some truck driver or some trucking company from one of the other, 49 states, because it's too hard for that truck to get in when they can stay in their state. And so, how's that been a challenge? Because I know that's not the easiest thing to navigate on a daily basis, I would imagine.
I like to use the example when I attend the American Trucking Association meetings, and I feel right at home because unfortunately, most of the issues they're talking about are California related, and I've always made the joke that I feel like I need to wear a disguise when I walk in there because, here comes California. But, that's just, you see a lot of these states, up north, we've got Oregon and Washington that are always going to follow what California does. A tool we've been using over the last, I want to say several years is, it's a tool in the toolbox that we don't really like to pull out, but you have to if you want to fight against something that is going to be very impactful in a negative way to the industry, which is litigation. So we filed numerous litigation actions against the state on a variety of things, predominantly against the California Air Resources Board. And we've been pretty successful on those. It's a tool that, we don't like to use often. It's very expensive. It's costly. The meter is always running with the attorneys. So,
Oh, yeah.
but we've had some very good success on utilizing that tool. And
Okay.
it's not that we're against all of these things. It's, let's take the most recent one, the Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation, which was transitioning from diesel to zero emission technology over a very condensed and unrealistic time frame. And
Hmm.
just, let's just look at that rule on face value. I mean, there's no infrastructure. The cost of these
Right.
trucks is a 4-to-1 ratio on, current diesel versus an electric truck. The weight considerations, charge time, um, range for these trucks. I'm not, it's not a knock against the technology. I always like to use the cell phone as an example. Like it'll get better. It
Oh,
always
yeah.
does. Just in that condensed time frame, it was just unrealistic. So we filed litigation on that. We all know what happened with that
Hmm.
rule. It went away. They knew they weren't going to get the waiver when Trump, the Trump administration won. I don't think
Right.
I don't think they had that on their bingo card when they released that regulation. But we're expecting post ACF, they're going to come up with something else. They're in the process of doing it. We know it's California. We're not going to leave our guard down. We're going to be continue to be engaged. We're going to be, paint the realistic picture on whatever they come up with, and hopefully that it is a realistic proposal. We don't know what that is. Um, so it's kind of, working with the other states, educating them. We constant communication on what's going on here. ATA does a great job of kind of mobilizing the states and the federation, making sure that, we've got their support as well. I always like to use this data point number with California versus other states. We have, I think, around 400,000 regulations. I think the next state, I don't know what it is, but it's not even near there. So, the heavy regulatory climate, and they don't all have to do with trucking, but
Right.
still that kind of gives you a glimpse of what this state is dealing with.
And I've told this before as well, with the electric trucks and all that. Us in the southeast, we don't have to worry about it because California is going to be the first one that has to implement it, and they're nowhere near ready for infrastructure wise. And that's a government issue that, if they want all that, then they've got to help put in the all the things to make it work, because we can't all have trucks show up at the Loves and all plug up at once, and then won't nobody have, it'll just be a complete blackout. So
Well, when we talked before the show started, I made the comment of when I lived in the foothills about we were
yeah.
subject of getting our power shut off. Okay,
Yeah.
so that kind of plays into this what we're talking about, and a data point that
Yeah.
I always love to throw out, especially during the ACF stuff, um, to cover all the trucks that are covered under the regulation for the ACF would have gobbled up 40% of California's grid. And
Wow.
so we're already subject to brownouts during, when the need was, when the heat's there and there's like we got to conserve the energy and stuff, and they're advising people not to use the energy. And the ironic thing is that the day that they released the proposal of the ACF, the governor actually went on the air and told Californians to not plug in their cars because we needed to save the grid. I mean, if that's, at least coordinate the day before, the day after to do that. But
Yeah.
that's telling you that, hey, we've got a problem here. And you're looking
Mhm.
at a multi-billion-dollar problem just to get an infrastructure put in substations or power stations, charging stations, all that stuff. So, you know, I coined that rule. I called it Fantasyland. And we get it. Like let's have a real conversation on what's feasible, what's realistic, and we can, maybe come to some sort of an agreement on
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I want to ask you your opinion of the trucking industry right now. I mean, we finally seem to have hit a stride to where rates have gone up, which the industry has needed for quite a while. We went through a couple just terrible years. But but we've got a lot of issues, that every state's dealing with, non-domicile fraud, double brokering, Trojan drivers, just illegal, I call it doppelganger, carriers out there. So, what's your opinion on where we're at right now as an industry?
Yeah, I think, there's always room for improvement. It's very nice to see that, the administration or the FMCSA is focusing under, Administrator Barr's like the safety, like putting a real big effort into safety. The chameleon carriers, which I'm assuming that's what you call
Yeah,
doppelganger
yeah,
carriers,
yeah,
but that's been an issue for so long. And you see these news features of these companies that are able to do it and just morph into another company. And I mean,
yeah.
something has to be done because we all know that that affects the reputation of the industry. A lot of these companies are unsafe operators, but also it's affecting the good companies that are doing it the right way, their ability to,
Hmm.
pick up business. And, these other ones shouldn't be able to like run their trucks or trucking companies that are operating like that. Those are, I really think that you're seeing a good effort. Resources, obviously, we'd like to see more resources. We'd like to see that in the state of California as well, with respect to, the commercial officers for the CHP, but also Caltrans's permitting office. We'd like to see more personnel or, improvements to make things more efficient for heavy haul guys. But I do like, seeing the trend on let's look into these bad operators and get them out of the industry. It's very refreshing to see that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's something that we've got to, as an industry, stay on top of, you know, push technology to help us and then stay on lawmakers to help with that. California's always been, the center of transportation, mainly because of the size and sheer, and y'all got, huge ports and everything. But for people that are on my side of the United States that, not been to California, know much about, the transportation side. Why has California been such an important state for trucking, you think?
I mean, just the sheer number of business opportunities. There's, so many millions of people in the state of California. They need their goods, they need their services. So, I get that question all the time, like, why do people continue to operate in California? You just cannot ignore the business opportunity. But I will say this, it seems that the state dares companies, not just trucking companies, but businesses in general, they just dare them to be successful. If you can navigate through these, regulations and these hurdles, then, it's like competing in an Olympic event. You get the award or the medal. And if you can navigate through those and be in compliance and do that, then yes, you will be successful. But there's just a lot of hurdles that businesses have to, address or navigate through. But it's just the sheer number of business opportunities that's out here. I mean, it's just incredible how much, business and opportunity there is. And that's what keeps, industries continuing to service California. You see a migration of businesses out, but there's still
Hmm.
going to be, that customer base is still going to be need to be fed or provided their products.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. Well, I want to turn my attention to the driver side of the industry. Drivers have seen over the last couple years, they like we've said just about the industry and about drivers, they get no respect. They've got it hard. They're the ones, away from their families. With the last administration, they've allowed a lot of people to come across the border. That's how we got, and with all their loopholes, it seems like anybody can figure out a loophole. I'm not very good at that for some reason, but
I'm too
the
stupid for it. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah.
we ended up with all these non-domicile. Not only are they maybe not safe per se with the English barrier and all that, they're taking away opportunities from people that did it the right way, that got their CDLs, went to school. Not to say maybe all of them aren't safe drivers either, but they went through the proper channels. We know who they are. We should know who they are. Our sponsor, Ready App, that's what they're all about, is driver identity. Trying to help a driver that is doing it right, or the conversation of, you got A driver and B driver, and A driver is always the one that goes over the extra mile, does the extra things, and gets paid the same thing as driver B, who cares less, does going to do less as possible. These drivers, in my opinion, have got to figure out ways to stand out. They've got to start self-promoting themselves. They've got to treat themselves as a company driver or an owner operator as a business person. They're a business. And one of the things that I'm proud to be partnered with them is their digital passport. And so I want to get your opinion on this for the California side of it. If drivers have this digital passport where they have all their documents in one place, that, we're working with the DOTs in the different states to where they can scan a QR code directly from the driver. All the driver's documents for that load and for themselves and the trucking company are in one place, that they can go and look in their back office, and they don't have to worry about a driver having dirty paperwork or crinkled up paperwork or even illegal paperwork that's not, with the load. And then, they're doing a driver scorecard where these drivers will be rated on, work history, DOT inspection, safety stuff. But it's not, and it's all, different levels of what each thing does, and they're not hurt completely. And then what happens is the driver, if a carrier's got 200 drivers, they take their 200 drivers driver score and they average it out for a carrier driver score, to where these brokers, with what's going on with the new Supreme Court decision, they've got to have more ways to do due diligent work to make sure the carrier is who they are and all this. So this way it proves the driver, and then the carrier has a number based on their drivers. But what the difference between that is, like a CSA score or something like that, it's on drivers that's been gone for 6 months, and that hurts a carrier. So this would be updated like every 30 days based on the carrier's roster. Do you see stuff like that being important and trying to help? Because now, like I said, y'all already have all these regulations. Now brokers have all this extra thrown on them that they've got to do, and they can't do too much, right? Because then they get into vicarious, liability situations. What do you think about where we're at with all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think if you've got, let's focus on efficiencies. If there's programs and technology that make things a little bit more efficient, access for records or, safety requirements that, the industry needs to follow, I definitely think that like those are things that need to be looked at, because if we're relying on the feds to come up with stuff,
Yeah.
I come from a state that a couple agencies still work off of Cobalt. So I don't even know what Cobalt is, but I do know that it was a system that was heavily utilized in the 90s and is still utilized in the state of California. So, I think when you have those enhancements and tools that help, that's always a good thing. You talked about the non-domiciled CDLs. Unfortunately in California, some California drivers, unfortunately were involved in some terrible accidents. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims that were involved in those accidents. And it kind of shined a light on, hey, we need to really look into these requirements and seeing what's going on. And, unfortunately, there was a federal audit and they found that the state had improperly issued certain non-domiciled CDLs under state law. And it affected, I want to say, 17,000 drivers. So that's been addressed. But it's just one of those, it's in California, we just, as far as like the safety requirements, and I'm a firm believer on when you have these requirements, we may hate them. We may hate these carb regulations. We may hate these safety regulations. We may not agree with them. but they are the rule and they are the law. And you should have, carriers and drivers and everybody should be expected to follow those. You talk about the drivers and, the respect, or it's a challenging job. And I'll say this, my probably the favorite enjoyable event that I look forward to every year is our truck driver championships.
Yeah, I was going to
And
bring that
this
up.
year we had over 1,000 drivers compete combined from the North and the South. And just getting to spend the time with the drivers and their families and seeing like their families and their coworkers and even other companies rooting for these drivers is really, really an awesome thing to see. We do as much as we can. We also do the Driver of the Month banquet and award ceremony, where we recognize the safest drivers throughout the year at an annual banquet, one in the North, one in the South. They get all dressed up. They bring their significant other or their children there. CHP is there for pictures, and they're always taking pictures with the Highway Patrol Commissioner and just giving that, Truck Driver Appreciation Week. I always go out there and I'll hand them a goodie bag and try and talk with them, and they give me the look like, "Hey, man, I'm working. Like, step off." Like, "Hey, I appreciate this, thank you, but I got to go to work." And they're just so like, just it's hard work. It's sometimes, it's the lack of respect they get. But I'm just always impressed with the professionalism, and if we could recognize them more, that's always a great thing.
Yeah, I agree. I actually did, before we got on this call, I set up a, driver appreciation at a truck stop. I finally had a truck stop that's allowing me to do it. A lot of truck stops are not wanting me to do it, but we're gonna go out and with Trucker Talk Radio and Ready App, we're gonna feed them and get them, fountain drink and a hot dog, and not really do much, pat them on the back, not sell them anything. Just and it's kind of weird. I walked into a couple truck stops and they just looked at me like I was crazy about it, and I'm like, why? I'm like, they
Yeah.
they they do a job of, like, it's a $5 hot dog drink. I mean, if somebody can't spend a couple $100 on some hot dogs and a Coke to, appreciate the driver and pat him on the back, I said, people need that. Not only truck drivers, everybody needs that on a day-to-day basis. Just, hey, we appreciate you. We appreciate you, being away from your family, for a week or two. And it's amazing that those kind of things that y'all do and other state do, and then just like what we're doing, it makes such a big difference to drivers. It makes them proud. It makes their families proud. I can only imagine seeing their families face getting to go to a gala and seeing their father or their husband or wife, whatever, get up and be recognized, even if it's only for a 2-minute thing. I mean, that's something that, the kids will remember and might get them into trucking, because that was kind of where I was wanting to ask you next. The one thing that I've noticed in trucking is the it's changed a lot and it's steadily going to evolve, right? But right now, I see where the industry is harder to get new drivers in. They It's not the good old boy days, where drivers really helped each other. They was on the CBs talking and had a brotherhood, kind of like. What do we need to do? And maybe it's stuff that y'all can do with inside the organization, the association stuff, to help this next generation driver want to be a truck driver.
Yeah, I think a good example of the importance of the industry is during COVID. And I'm a very silver linings person. We don't need to go into COVID. I've got my opinions on it, but you look at some of the things that came from there, and one of the things that I really thought was good was the importance of the industry and the drivers, and so the reliance on the drivers to be able to make those transport goods that were very critical during that time, raise driver pay. I think it really showed how important the drivers are and how important it is for companies to keep those drivers. And so I think you've seen a lot of improvements in driver betterment, driver recognition, driver pay. Um, it's a great job to where the barrier to entry, you don't need a college education, you don't need all these, obviously you have to get your proper credentials to be able to operate a truck and go through the
Right.
training and be a safe driver, but the pay has come up. Companies have been flexible on schedules. And you see these companies offering certain amount of pay and bonus and all that. So it's a good paying job that can provide someone a well-paying job for many, many years. Um, it's the technology in the trucks. It's not like the what 18 gears like shifting. They're all automatic. Seats pretty comfortable. They got the technology in there, and I even drove one on, I'm not going to say which member, but they let me drive. I didn't go out on the street, but I was in their yard driving one. And I was like, wow, if I can actually drive this thing, it's an automatic now. So,
Right.
the improvements, the comfort, but there are challenges and issues that still need to be addressed. We talked about truck parking and how much of a pain in the what that is to look for a safe place to park, place for them to be able to like relax and not worry about, getting their load stolen or, accosted or something like that. And there's always room for improvement. But I think like over the last few years, you've seen a definite improvement in respect level for appreciating what those drivers do. And it's always ongoing.
Well, I got two more questions before I let you
Sure.
go. The first one
I could do
is
this all day.
I,
So
I could too. I
yeah,
enjoy it. People
we
like,
can do
how do you
part
sit there
two
and
and
do
three later on this week if
it,
you want.
it,
But
it sounds great. I'd appreciate that. But y'all are like we had said about the emission stuff. Y'all are like the leading in everything. It seems like in the state of California. So I feel like y'all in Texas are the AI capitals for when trucking really gets AI. I know they're doing a lot of that in Texas in the basin, which I think is a good place for it to be, work through the bugs and stuff because it's private roads. But where do you see the industry in 3 to 5 years? We got AI now with a lot, autonomous trucks are always in the news. So what's your vision over the next couple of years?
yeah, the state of California, the Department of Motor Vehicles recently released their regulations for testing of autonomous trucks in the state. And I believe it took 8, 9, maybe 10 years to get those pushed out. It's a very political issue in the state of California. For us, um, it wasn't one of those issues that we were, top issues. We had, ACF, we had AB5, we had all these major right in front of you issues that we had to address and get into litigation and stuff. And so those were the priority issues. It is out there. The regulations are out there for companies to test and have, their hourly requirements that, they have to meet. It'll be interesting to see how, this goes, but it is happening, and you are seeing it in other states a little, quicker than obviously in California. From us, from our membership, large carriers, they, obviously have been testing for quite some time. They're investing in the technology and all that. And I think in time you'll see other companies, I don't want to say embracing it, but obviously looking into it and seeing if it's a good fit for their company.
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle right now with autonomous is that technology is so fast. A
Yeah,
lot of the stuff is already outdating itself to
exactly.
what, and so then the production side of it. So I think we're still, a ways from that. But I got one personal question that I do want to ask you. So you've been in the industry a long time. You've been there for just with the CTA for a long time. What accomplishment are you most proud about so far in your career?
Just the gratification of when we're successful on defeating something. It'd be nice to be going on the offensive
Uh-huh.
occasionally, but we're usually playing defense because it's California. Our legislative session is a lot more different than other states. It's year round every year. There's usually 2,000 to 3,000 brilliant ideas that are introduced every year. Obviously, not all of them have to do with trucking, but this year we were actively monitoring and engaged in measures because maybe they don't have something to do with trucking, but maybe they have something downstream impact or upstream with the supply chain, which affects our members. So, probably the accomplishments is just, I guess you could say they've allowed me to be here as long as I have. I must be doing something right, but
That's what exactly what I was going to say. You've been doing
um,
something right to
yeah, no, I
still
just,
be there.
I'm very honored to represent such a great industry and a very underappreciated industry. And the membership, they're always there to support us when we need them. And I call them the true experts. Like, we can look at these regulations, but I'm not going to know how it's going to impact Jones Trucking or, the fleet next door to them. So I always appreciate the involvement and the volunteerism. And I'm sure John and Ben mentioned this when you talk with them. Like, they're not getting paid for being a member, they're paying their dues, but when they're actively involved and they're volunteering their time to be a leader and help navigate and, kind of draft policies for the industry, that's very admirable for people to do that. But accomplishments, it's just, I'm not a victory lap guy. I'm not a horn tooter guy. Kind of just that's the job. Get it done. Do what you can. And the appreciation and the accolades from the membership. I always appreciate the kind words and stuff. But I really enjoy what I do. I do. I don't think I've ever thought about moving on to anything else. So, and now I'm getting old, so I don't even think I could do anything else.
I think you're where you're supposed to be until
I
you're
guess
ready to
until they're ready to kick me out of here. So.
There you go. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an outstanding conversation. I appreciate your leadership and your caring about the industry. I can see it and hear it in your voice. So we appreciate that, and I appreciate you being an advocate. That's something that I feel like I try to be for drivers is to do that. So for you to do it for drivers and trucking companies and the full industry, we definitely appreciate that. And then basically you've given your life's work to the industry, and so I want to make sure that everybody understands that and appreciate. But before I let you go, give you a second to tell people how to get a hold of you, how they can get in touch and join the CTA, or if they have questions or anything, who they can contact.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So our website is caltrux.org. So it's CALTRUX.org. We're also on LinkedIn, Facebook. I think we even have a TikTok account too. I'm not into that stuff, but I'm also on social media, LinkedIn. So you can find Eric Sauer on LinkedIn. But yeah, for people out there, take a look. If you're operating in California, get involved in the fight. There's always a fight. I know truckers love fights. So, um, we'd love to have you join or at least like come and check out a few meetings and see what's going on in the industry. And, thank you so much for having me. This is a really great opportunity to get to know you, talk to you, and talk trucking. I love it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We'll definitely have to have you back on for part 2 and 3. I've enjoyed it as
We could go
well.
up to probably volume 10. So
Yeah, we hadn't even scratched the surface of everything we can talk about in trucking, so that's for sure. But again, I appreciate you taking an hour out of your busy day to spend it with us. Everyone, thank you again for joining us on another episode of Trucker Talk Radio Behind the Wheelhouse. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, like, share, follow through all our different social medias. Everybody be safe out there. If you see a trucker, give them a thumbs up or toot the horn. If you're, let your kids do that. I think that's still something that should be done all the time because drivers and company drivers, owner operator alike, enjoy doing that. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you again, Eric, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Wheelhouse.
Thank you.
Today's episode is sponsored by Gray Cross. Every day, professional drivers make sacrifices that most people never see. Long hours, missed holidays, time away from family, and the responsibility of keeping America's supply chain moving. Gray Cross was created to support those drivers and their families when life takes an unexpected turn. By providing assistance, resources, and support during the difficult times, Gray Cross helps strengthen the trucking community one family at a time. Because behind every truck is a driver. Behind every driver is a family counting on them. If you'd like to support the mission, visit graycross.org to learn more. Donations are always appreciated, but simply sharing their message with others in the industry can make a tremendous difference. Gray Cross, supporting the people who keep America moving. Today's episode is brought to you by Rodeo. Trust is the one most valuable asset in transportation. That's why Rodeo created Driver Verify. Driver Verify helps carriers, brokers, and transportation companies gain greater confidence through verified driver identities, professional credentials, work history, and onboarding visibility. Drivers can securely maintain CDL information, endorsements, certifications, and employment records, all in one professional profile. As fraud continues to impact the transportation industry, verification has never been more important. Ready App, verified drivers, trusted freight. Go check them out at ready-app.com.